welcome to another episode of Search News You Can Use with me, Dr. Marie Haynes, and a very special guest. Today I have with me Dawn Anderson. Welcome, Dawn.
Hi, everybody, and thanks for inviting me, Marie.
Yeah, I wanted to share, this is going to be a little bit of a different episode than what I usually do, because usually it's just me chatting. And then last time we had an interview with Lily Ray, which went really, really well. And so I started looking at this article that Google wrote this week about how they're using AI, artificial intelligence, in their algorithms. And realized I was going to tweet about it. And then I realized, oh, this is more than a tweet, it's a blog post. And then when I wrote the blog post, I realized maybe I'm a little bit out of my area of expertise here. And seeing as I preach how important it is to have somebody with good expertise when you write content, I reached out to Dawn, who has been studying a lot in this area. So Dawn, can you maybe explain your own EAT on this subject? I know you've got a bunch of schooling and expertise here.
Yeah, so I've really been studying, if you like, information retrieval, which is the arm of computer science behind web search, for quite a few years now. I'm not an expert in it, I wouldn't say. I'm an SEO, but I discovered when I was doing my Master of Science in Digital Marketing a few years ago, when I started to dig around in academic papers on web crawling, I discovered this whole exciting world of information retrieval. And that was back in 2017, I think. So for 4 years now, I've been a bit of a lurker in the information retrieval world. I've been to quite a few of the conferences. I was on, if you like, the supporting panel for the web conference in San Francisco a few years ago, along with information retrieval engineers. And I've actually spoken at a few of their conferences as well. So it covers things like crawling, entity-oriented search, as I say, just normal indexing, etc., and ranking. Obviously, learning to rank, machine learning, supported ranking, and so forth. Just everything. It's actually a huge area that's literally sits behind web search. So yeah, it's super interesting. So I spend a lot of time like geeking out in that space, yeah. But also I'm a practicing SEO.
So you and I are really fun at parties, right? Talking about algorithms and
I try never to sort of talk about what I do at parties.
I saw somebody put on Twitter this week a cartoon. It might have been Cyrus Shepherd. Who said, or here's Cyrus at a party or something, and he's talking about like, did you know that when Google changes title tags, blah blah blah? It's probably not what most people at parties want to talk about, but it's exciting too.
I mean, I love SEO, but I'm trying to get more of a balance to my life. So
that's probably smart.
I'm very, we tend to be all-consuming with it as SEOs. It is an always-on subject.
And there's so much to learn and to know and to speculate about, right? And so the reason why I wanted you to come and talk with me was just this blog post that Google put out about the advances that they've made in terms of AI and really understanding language, I think, is most of what they're talking about. I think it's really important for us to discuss this because when I first started in SEO, I think that the main focus of search engines was matching keywords on pages, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how that is changing? I don't know if that's too broad of a question, but yeah, I think you know what I'm getting at there.
No, absolutely. Well, obviously, as you say, historically, I mean, natural language understanding goes back, to the 50s probably anyway. So it's a very, very aged. It's linguistics ultimately, and the origins are in libraries and library science, and obviously the internet and the web, or the web in particular, it's just a big library. That's all it is. I went to an information retrieval conference, and one of the if you like, the rock stars of their industry, because they also have like rock stars, had a T-shirt on that said the original search engineer, librarian, and that's all it is. So ultimately, we know that the web is literally just books and then pages of books, with a page for being a web page, if you like. But historically, understanding what was on a web page and matching that in search was traditionally just a binary match thing. Is the word there? If it's not, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. Yeah. And obviously, if a word is in the document or the web document, it gets included in the initial recall. You know, if it's not, then it's just completely ignored. Mm-hmm. Whereas now things have moved on and they can understand things and context of things and longer, it's not just words, it's sentences. Some of the more advanced and recent AI algorithms, if you like BERT and so forth, can understand a word in the context potentially of a book or the whole of Wikipedia. So it's not just, there's less ambiguity. Ambiguity is still there, but it's more easily understood, for instance. Google always use that example of understanding the word bank in the context of, if you just said the word bank, you wouldn't know whether it meant a bank on a river, a bank, financial bank, but it goes right back to Furthian linguistics and the notion of you shall understand the word by the company it keeps. So if everything around it is talking about fishes, water, grass, it's definitely going to be about the riverbank. Whereas if the word is in a page or a collection of pages that are about money, finance, and so forth, then it's going to be talking about currency, and a bank, an institutional bank. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of coming through, and it's not there yet, but you can see that things like questions and answers and so forth, all of this is data that is just feeding the machine of how language all fits together and breaking it all down, because some of the things like BERT is so computationally expensive, or it was when it first came out. It was just impossible. You could never have run that in massive production search, only for tiny ambiguous queries like bank and its and so forth. And funnily enough, all the things like the stop words that used to be missed out years ago, this is how something that has changed. Historically, we used to say, oh, well, ignore all the stop words because they're a huge amount of words, but they don't add any value. Whereas now, they actually are contextual glue. So they
stop words being, just in case everybody is not aware, like words like to and from and things like that.
All of for instance, the is the most popular, most commonly used word in the English language, and it's used a huge amount. So in traditional information retrieval, things like that were just discounted. Mm-hmm. They obviously still have quite a low value, but when you take a sentence, for instance, they'll have low weight, but they will add contextual glue, for instance, because you could never, and it depends on when it's used, like the who. The is very important, but it's not in a sentence about, Marie went to the shop. It's very low weight there. So it's all about weights and balances in language and how important things are together. So it's all changing very much.
And the more that Google understands language, it really should change how we do SEO, I think. Although it's very hard to practically say, now we need to do this. I think in the past, a lot of SEO was trying to reverse engineer Google's algorithms. Because to some extent, take, for example, PageRank. Like, we know that PageRank is still very important. Links are important. But do you think that it's changed in its relative importance?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Okay.
Because, funnily enough, well, I think since the emergence of learning to rank, learning to rank is machine learning. It really is something that seems to come through when core algorithm updates happen. Yeah. So learning to rank is ultimately the search engines identify a gold standard, if you like, a gold standard of what good search would look like. And then obviously it goes out to the quality raters and they mark it, etc. And then they have this thing called normalized discounted cumulative gain, which all the scores come back in and then everything gets adjusted. And then that gets maybe pushed back out to the whole algorithm. And that's probably where a core algorithm comes in, where a measure by human raters has deemed the test collection that got pushed out for human feedback, to say, does this look good? Yeah. But I think that ultimately there are now many, many things. There are entities which can give clues as to what things are. Mm-hmm. beyond years ago, there wasn't as much content out there as there is now. So obviously there's more content and there's more good content as well. So the quality is much higher. Funnily enough, a few years ago when Andrei Lipatsev was on a webinar with, I think Ammon was on it, Eric Enge, I think Rand was on it. And they had that conversation about what are the ranking factors, and everybody went nuts when he went, oh, it's content and links, yeah. But a lot of people missed out on the fact that what he said was, when there's not enough good content, we rely a lot on links. Yeah, we have to rank spam. Yeah, because if we don't rank something, somebody's going to go elsewhere.
Something's got to be there, yeah.
Exactly. So in non-English languages, there's still a big, massive gap, but that's also being filled because the fact is now a lot of the AI and natural language algorithms are translating languages without having to go through English first. So, for instance, Facebook produced something, I can't remember what it's called. It's a huge algorithm that literally translates English to Chinese French to Chinese without having to go through English. Yeah.
Okay.
Language. And I know that Bing and Microsoft are doing a massive push on X multilingual modeling, if you like. That's cross-language, multi-language modeling, machine learning modeling, yeah. So the language thing is huge because there's not enough content, native content in non-English languages in a lot of these countries around the world, yeah. So that means that it's harder to rank things because the web
is that because the frameworks are just built to understand English, or they're trained on English?
The whole web is built on programmers English. Everything is built in English, yeah. Everything, legacy, everything is built on English. The content, the vast majority of content is in English, even though it's only a small part of the world, yeah. So there's a huge bias. Ricardo Biesi-Yates did a huge study on bias on the web, and he found there's a massive bias in favor of English because the web was built on English, yeah. Everything, yeah. Even though it's a tiny part of the world, you're English speaking, there's a massive bias, yeah. So there's that, but the fact of the matter is, as Andre said, it's now one of very, very many things because there wasn't that issue with maybe localization, the geo aspects, the personalization. There wasn't the technology to make things more contextual, and the best search results are the ones that are tailored to the user ultimately. So that's all come through. So I think whilst links still do matter as almost final votes, if you like, or the second fine-tuned stages, yeah, so the later stages of ranking, because there's multiple stages of ranking in all commercial search engines. That's common knowledge across information retrieval and natural language engineers and machine learning engineers, because you can't possibly rank everything. You can't rank everything at once. You have to say, let's get rid of all the non-runners. Yeah. So it's like, it's tiered. It's like a cascade ranking. So let's just get rid of, and then they have this thing called top K re-ranking. So we fetch back from a million documents the top 1,000. And then that's where the heavy machine learning comes in, and they start to like re-rank. And that's probably where things like learning to rank do come into it, where they utilize for research clicks. Yeah. And there's an interesting model actually that's just been contributed by Bing called ORCAs, which is masses of actual clicks on their queries and the documents that samples, yeah.
Okay.
That were returned. That's the reason they've done that is because of ambiguity on the underspecified query. So say I type in, I don't know, let me use an example. Apple, right? Say I type apple in. What do I mean? Do I mean apple fruit? Do I mean apple pie? Do I mean apple recipes? Do I mean apple the company? Depends. Everything depends, yeah. Because it's an underspecified query. It's ambiguous and underspecified, yeah. So, well, no, it's not ambiguous. Let me think of one that is ambiguous. Rose is ambiguous. There's a big difference between underspecified and ambiguous, yeah. Underspecified is, could mean, so say I type in the word recipe. What do I want? What do I want? Do I want all recipes? Do I want pie? Do I want, a tutorial? Do I want pictures of recipes? Do I, so you have to meet all the needs to be the most relevant. Yeah. Comprehensiveness on the underspecified query.
It seems to me that one of the things that Google has been most proud of in terms of language and their advances here is in understanding the intent behind queries, right? That's what BERT was really the big advance in that, I think, was probably their biggest advance in being able to understand intent. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Is BERT? I have a question about BERT. I don't know if you can answer. Do you know if Google uses BERT to understand content on pages as well? Understand language on pages? Or do we know if it's mostly just queries?
Yeah, I think it's both. I think it's both on ambiguous. All machine learning natural language models are using both. But I think the problem was, if you remember, Danny Sullivan, when he was questioned, he said, it's really in the first stage of BERT, which was when he went from research to production, so 2019, it was still unbelievably expensive. It has this thing called quadratic dependency, which they use in computer science and information retrieval and web search. They use this thing called the big O notation, which is a measure it's used in all computer science. It's not a measure of speed dependent on somebody's computer. It's based on speed, based on the number of computations that are required. And the problem with something like BERT is it has this thing called this computational dependency. So every word that is looked at has to be measured in comparison with the words that surround it. So say it's in comparison a context window with 4 other words. It's 4 times 4 times 4 times. It's all to the power of, So it's not possible, or it wasn't possible to use it at scale because the CPUs were just environmentally crazy, financially. So it was really only originally used on the very most ambiguous things,
Okay.
Phrases, sentences, phrases, tiny little things where there may be ambiguity. So probably not on things like navigational queries. So if I type in Marie Haynes consultancy, it's not going to be using BERT probably because it's obvious. If I type in triumph, maybe a little bit on a sentence. But if I type in, some I don't know, if I type in Google, it's not going to be used there. So it's just a little very ambiguous thing. And it's probably
go ahead.
Sorry. And I think the BERT that we see now in Google, I think BERT was not the BERT algorithm or the BERT model that was released into open source natural language, because it was BERT-like. Everything's like BERT-like. It's almost the concept of BERT, because BERT has many different uses. So I believe that the BERT in production that we hear of is probably a mile away from the one that was released in open source.
Oh, interesting.
But also, they've built a lot of hybrids off that because, as you know, they utilize algorithms over and over and over in different parts, lots of modules, all over the place. So I believe that, for instance, they're using lots of hybrid BERTs. For instance, Facebook released into open source something called was it Google? I think it might have been Google that released Electra, which was much more, used a different masking system. BERT used this masking model where they hide a word and then the model guesses what it is and so forth. Then it all gets trained on what's the missing word type thing. And there's something called Albert, which was produced by, I think Facebook did Electra actually. But anyway, there's loads of them. There's so many of them, both contributed by the natural language research community, but also massive search engines. And a lot of them are open source. So a lot of these big companies are using bits and pieces, almost like off the shelf, and then adapting. So I think there's been a huge hockey stick approach to context and intent understanding, because everything comes from language and the way the world fits together. Once you understand language more, you understand intent more. And then when you start to overlap it with entities and crawling knowledge bases and knowledge repositories like DBpedia, Wikipedia, layering on schemas and so forth, that ambiguity starts to fall away, and links to answer your question in a very, very long way are literally less of a factor, because they're less
more
that
people understands. Yeah, the less they. Yeah, I'm sorry.
They're a smaller fish in a big pond, whereas originally they were a big fish in a small pond.
Yeah,
it's just one final vote, or maybe one of the fewer final votes, maybe on the head terms, which, because you can rank many things without a single link, by relevance. And I've seen a lot of big sites that have millions of links, but they don't rank for anything, because you've got to meet the query first. If you don't meet the query, you can't rank.
Which wasn't always the case, right? Because in the past, you could take like really mediocre content that maybe wasn't the best of its kind, and if you knew how to build links were the power, right? Yeah, I still think I read a study from Proficient Digital last year that was talking about, yes, links are still a very important ranking factor, but their study said that only when they come from authoritative sites, which kind of fits with what we've been talking about. That is, a link, if Google can recognize that, this authoritative entity has mentioned you, Don, or an SEO, that connects, right? That helps them to understand that there is some authoritative there.
Well, humans are things, I tried to find it the other day, actually, and add it to your document. Apologies there, my husband coming in.
No worries.
I think it was Christy Olsen, actually, who was speaking at an SMX, and what she'd said was, yes, Bing can work out who the authorities are. Well, it's like anything. 6 degrees of separation is a link graph. Do you remember this whole saying, like 6 degrees of separation?
Kevin Bacon thing.
Everything is a connection. Social connections are a web of connection, nodes and edges. That's it. And as you said, an authority is probably going to be quite close if you mapped it into a vector of similarity and so forth, and you laid it all out. Experts are going to sit quite close to the expert seeds, if you like. So if you say in our industry, probably the big experts are, things like search engine land, or search engine roundtable, John Mueller, whoever else, people that sit there, maybe they've contributed to it, maybe they've spoken on certain subjects, maybe they've got... Sorry, Maria. Yeah.
It's all right. Don't worry about it. We're all working from home. We get it.
Yeah, my dog, so there will be 100% entity connections, So as you say, Unlinked mentioned, Gary Esch has even mentioned that when he did that Ask Me Anything. What do you use Unlinked mentions for? Entity determination, So they can extract content. They can look at the content and say, hey, where are all the entities on this page? Extract them all, because things like BERT allow for entity determination when you map it to known entities, but also things like structured data, semi-structured data. Structured data can take the form of a table, a table with data and fields and so forth. So this is all just mapping of things to strings, So there is that. So definitely, if you talk about a lot of topics,
as SEOs, how do we take that information? I mean, and use it to our advantage? Because in the past, I think a lot of SEO was like, how can we trick search engines into thinking we're more authoritative, more whatever. And I mean, there's still a component of that. We still recommend, we call it mention building rather than link building, trying to get mentions in authoritative places. But how has the work of an SEO changed, understanding what you're saying about, the entities on the page and how Google extracts that? Is there something we can take from that and be better SEOs because of that knowledge?
Yeah. Well, I would say in this context, you are what you write about, or you are what you speak about. So I would say, to clients, and I would say to other SEOs, kind of stay within your lane. Don't try and cover too many bases. Yeah. Become an expert on a niche, if you like. Start with a niche, build from the niche and so forth, and then expand the niche into a topic and understand the difference, get your head around the notion of Zipf's law, because if you are literally spreading yourself too thin, you're irrelevant for everything. Whereas
explain that. I had not heard of Zipf's law before I saw your presentation, and we'll link to the presentation if you're listening to this on Spotify or watching on YouTube. It'll be linked. It's really, really good. And even if you're an SEO, if you think you don't need to know about this, you're wrong. Because I read your slide presentation, I was like, oh my gosh, I should have seen this ages ago. Yeah. Tell me about this.
Well, I always use the analogy walnuts and peanuts. And walnuts and peanuts means the big things that you are an expert on or what you're important on will rise to the top, because they're the things where you do the most internal linking. They're the topics that you would surface the most and so forth. So I'd be thinking about doing things like, so I'll explain Zipf's law. So Zipf's law means, and PageRank is built on Zipf's law. That's 100% it. So it basically everything is ranked in order. It's like halving. Do you remember the old, like, when you go from PageRank 8, you have to be double that, get to 9, and double that. So that's Zipfian distribution. Okay. Perfectly aligned power law. So you end up with this very, very huge, narrow head, yeah? And those will be the huge important topics, like what are the biggest search terms in the world? But that Zipfian distribution follows in everything in the world. It's a mystery, actually. It's a phenomenon of the world. There's an amazing video called Zipf's Mystery. And if you can link to that, please do, because it will blow people's minds. Because every single part of web search and computer science and information retrieval relates to Zipf's law. Now, that also relates to caching, to what they will store in a cache on the short-term memory. So the most important pages on the internet will be stored in a very near access computers in search, for instance, yeah. And then the long tail. So, for instance, if you go super long tail at scale, you'll tank your website, yeah, because all of a sudden you become such a super, super long. You could become unimportant for too many things, yeah. Also, what happens is you're not triggering any queries, yeah. You've got loads of pages, search, with 10 search volume. You just end up with so much stuff, and it comes back to also, crawling probably follows this Zipfian distribution where the most important page, it's all based on importance. The many times that Google talk about everything is driven by importance. What does that mean? The most visited pages on the web will get crawled the most. The biggest queries, the pages that you'll see it, CNN constantly getting their logs smashed with Google crawling it, because if CNN is not up to date, so everything follows this curve like this. So if you're seeing a tiny bit of crawling and it's going down, 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 and down, think about whether you literally just released a lot of pages that are like unimportant and don't match on queries. Yeah, that's a big thing, and I've seen that over and over again where people are just, and I've done it myself historically. I do a lot of things to test things where, you programmatically spit out a lot of content, see what happens, and it always follows the same. Initially, you get a big uptick where Google thinks, hey, look at all this, and then they realize that it's just spam, effectively. Yeah.
It sounds like the take-home message is like stay in your lane, to stay in what you're known as. Yeah. Well,
not just that. Stay in your lane and keep improving the pages that are triggering queries. Yeah.
Okay.
And if the pages you've got are, this is my view anyway, if the pages you've got are not triggering queries, think about, hey, do they actually meet any need? Yeah. If they don't, improve them to meet a need that answers queries. Don't just keep spitting out content for the sake of it. Actually meet queries, yeah. Because I see a lot of blogs, for instance, that are just woolly, pointless, rambling thoughts. Who cares? No offense, yeah. That's great. If you're an influencer, sometimes you create content that's not designed for search, and it will get traffic, and it will get traffic in search. Because, for instance, you may have a massive following. You're a thought leader, so actually doesn't necessarily have to meet queries, but you have to support it as well with content that is for a purpose. Yeah. But if you have like loads and loads of like content that doesn't meet any queries, not getting indexed, for instance, and so forth, then think about how you can actually start to categorize that. Maybe build a great section that actually meets the queries. Yeah. So yeah. Stay in your lane, build a great structure that actually is designed to meet queries. Yeah. Types of content, etc. Don't create loads of pages that compete with each other, for instance. Just
have one strong authoritative piece on
build strong pages and then overflow them when you start to think, hey, this could be a topic on its own right, this could be a topic on its own right, this could be a section. So
we've had really good success with doing things like content hubs, and I think that's kind of what you're talking about, right? Is here's our strong piece of content on this topic, and then here's all the other things we've got to support it, and those the internal links support each other, and then I think it helps Google be more confident about the entity information in those pages. If they can see that I'm authoritatively covering and accurately covering the entity, that information across multiple parts of my site, I think that can be helpful. In the blog post on AI that Google put out, they talked a lot about neural matching. And to me, now this was an area that I don't know a lot about neural matching. I think this was the point when I was writing it, where I said, I think I need some help here. And neural matching, though, what I took from that was how neural matching is really good for entity extraction.
Yeah. It's not that. Neural matching starts to map the world, if you like, using similarities. If you look a lot at what's happening in search, it's all based around vectors and similarity search and distances from things, yeah? So, and also trying to look almost like building search based on around the connections in the real world, yeah? And then probability determination around classification. What type of thing is this? What type of thing is this? That's that distance from that. So, for instance, your internal linking, you should try and like keep it really tight, because those things live together in vectors, in vector space, distance, So it's kind of almost like they have this thing called feed forward networks. Is probability. Is this probability that this relates to this or this? Well, it's this. And then the next one, feed forward, take the learnings, feed forward. And that's kind of how neural matching works. It's various layers of guessing, classifying, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And that's why I know it's not neural matching, but you asked about whether it's easy to spot spam. I think once you start to get into machine learning, supervised and unsupervised, once you've seen enough of something, it's literally a simple case of what's the probability that this is an orange, looking at all the pixels in that. Yes, no, yes, no. Confidence grows and eventually it's like, yeah, that's an orange. The same with spam blog posts. Initially it's like, well, we've only got so much data on it. What's the probability of this? The more data comes in, the more the confidence. Yeah, that's spam. No, that's spam. So I think, like you said, neural matching is kind of a separate thing, but it's all based around probability determination and confidence.
Yeah. And I think like all of these really represent just Google trying to be more accurate, trying to not be able to be gamed, but to be able to say, like, when we put this in front of a searcher, we feel really confident that it's safe for the searcher, it's authoritative.
Well, that's why at the moment, that's why they use the heavy machine learning on the re-ranking and final ranking stages. Yeah. So fetch back the top 20 and then seek to order it in descending order of intent. And that is really hard. That is what they call in information retrieval an NP hard problem. Never been solved, yeah? Because the descending order of intent should be perfect for the user at the right time in the right place. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
So that is super expensive. Yeah. And it's done on the fly, if you like. Yeah. So it's machine learning at its finest almost, and it's not solved. Yeah.
Interesting. It's really interesting. Oh, sorry, you were going on.
I was going to say I did a talk actually just recently, the most recent one actually, that covers that subject of non-document independent dynamic search ranking, yeah, which is basically not ranking a document on what they call the probability ranking principle, which is the holy grail of information retrieval, yeah, because historically what would happen is if you had a load of documents that were very, very similar, probability ranking principle would order them all in like one after the other, and that's a very bad experience because they might all meet the same intent. Yeah. Okay. You used to have that issue with Yelp. Do you remember Yelp used to have like 1 to 10, restaurants in London? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's because they all measured the same on the probability ranking principle. Yeah.
Okay.
So they're all equally relevant on a measure of relevance. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Because that should go in like one half of that, a third of that, and so forth, down the Zipf distribution. But they're trying to not do that now, and it's a big, massive thing that they're really focused on in the field of information retrieval at the moment, making it so that actually the top 10, 20 results are not based on the probability ranking principle. They're based on document independence, yeah? In other words, the document that is ranked in a certain space is ranked taking into consideration everything else that is a candidate in, say, the top 20, and putting them all in the right order to meet lots of different intents in descending order of intent. And that comes from clicks. So knowing what the intent was foremost, that's where you get, in part, query intent shift, where all of a sudden, Black Friday, everything switches to e-commerce rankings, yeah. Sports queries and travel queries. Sports and travel swaps around a few times a year when sport derbies are on. So say, for instance, if you've got like a city, or I don't know, say you're in the US or Canada, I know you like hockey, for instance. Maybe some of your teams are named after the places, yeah. But some of the time, those queries might be travel queries. So say, for instance, you say, I don't know, Ontario, Toronto, that might be a travel query 90% of the year. But if they're playing each other at hockey, all of a sudden, everything will switch to sports, and their whole intent becomes sports related. So that's what search engines are trying to do. And that's called temporal search ranking as well. So it's based on time. It's like if the query intent shifts, we should order things based on the intent at that time. Really, really hard. Yeah.
It is. I've noticed something that we've seen after some of the most recent core updates is the top results. It's almost like you can see that, the first one matches this intent and the second one is this intent.
And it's maybe the order of intent at that time.
Yeah. So now I'm going to pay more attention to that with what you just said in mind, because it really does seem that way, that sometimes they're not sure, is the searcher looking to shop, and so they'll show. And then so let's say our client was an e-commerce page that used to rank on page 1. We can often see that, before this update, there were like 8 e-commerce pages ranking on page 1, and after only 2 of them are. And so, those are some of the situations where Google might say, there's nothing particularly wrong with your pages. It's just that Google's figured out the intent.
Yeah, well, and that shifts a lot, yeah. And it's mostly certain times of the year, like Black Friday, Cyber Monday, Christmas, times where the intent is buy. Literally everything becomes a transactional result that time of the year, yeah. You see it. And, there's that famous example, Easter. And it's in an academic paper by Kira Radinsky. And if you've not read that, there's a lot of stuff around this query intent shift. She's really well known for it, cited a lot. She was at eBay, and now I think she does a lot of stuff in the machine learning space in natural language understanding. But the query she used in her PhD paper was the word Easter. That shifts in intent lots, yeah. If I'm looking for Easter in January, all I want to know is when it is. Yeah. And the date will come up. And that'll be like Easter is whatever day it is, because it changes, as we know. 2 weeks before, things to do starts to come up. Yeah. Places to go at Easter, because people are planning, and that's a massive shift. Yeah. And then on Easter Sunday, somebody will type into Google or whatever, Easter, the intent has shifted to what does it mean? Because it's like I might type in, because I don't celebrate Thanksgiving because I'm in the UK. I might be typing in, what does it, I have no idea what the history of Thanksgiving is. I know lots of people are doing it right now. Thanksgiving, what does it mean? Immediately it comes to the Wikipedia page, what it's all about. So query intent shift is something that happens all the time. We don't always notice it, and it's changing. Everything is changing.
So a lot of these, when we see, for example, the SEMrush sensor and Mozcast and those tools that try to figure out, how much turbulence is in the SERPs, a lot of the time, like we've had these things that we've said, oh, it looks like there was an update, but Google didn't announce anything. And really it's hard to see patterns in what changed. Maybe that's just reflecting the world changing. Like like what's important, it's Thanksgiving here. Well, maybe it's like an important day in another country that, shifts those search results.
Well, I use the example in one of the talks I did. I'd use the example of 4 candles. Yeah. Now, if you've never seen the 2 Ronnies, it's a pretty famous comedians. They're both dead now, sadly, but they were brilliant in like the 70s and 80s. They were really famous, and they had this sketch called 4 Candles. Yeah. So when they both died, and I use that example as for ambiguity, because actually the comedy sketches were around the ambiguity and play on words of 4 candles. This guy goes into a hardware shop, and one can't understand the other's language, and he thinks he's saying 4 candles, and it's 4 candles. Yeah. So he comes back with 4 candles, and he goes, no, 4 candles. Yeah. And it goes on like that. Very good. But it illustrates the challenges that search engines face, not just with words, but with what they call homonyms, which are, is it homonyms? That's spoken word.
Sound the same. Yeah.
Which is even harder, because obviously now we've got voice search emerging, and it's rubbish still. So, and that's partly because it's such a big challenge. Anyway, the point is, when I was researching that, I typed in the entities Ronnie Corbett and Ronnie Barker and 4 candles into Google Trends. And, there were 2 massive spikes on that query, 4 candles, and on their names. And it was on the day that both died. There was a massive spike on the word 4 candles. Now, if you didn't know what it meant, you wouldn't. If you had no clue that either of those had died, you wouldn't understand that things. What I'm saying is, we don't know sometimes why things are changing, because we're not privy to every single person's intent in every part of the world. Yeah, we can only go off. We can only go off our own small world, if you like.
And that's really helpful to us, because for a few years, that's what we tried to do. Like every time there was a big update, we would try to figure out, what did Google do and how can we adapt to it? And that was good when maybe like in the early days of Penguin, we could say, oh, well, it looks like sites that had this type of link were affected, and we could, maybe use the disavow tool. But like today, when Google has an update, it's very hard to specifically point out something, that you've done wrong. And they give us, I'm sure you've seen Google's blog post on what webmasters need to know about core updates. And there's a list of a whole bunch of questions about, is there appropriate expertise? Is this substantially better content than what's out there? And when that first came out, I think a lot of people were like, well, this is wishful thinking. Google can't really measure these things.
Well, they can, because they have what they call human in the loop. Yeah. So the human in the loop, every search engine, every information retrieval, like engineer, and in actual just the studies that they teach in universities or whatever, or every course, says that at every stage of information retrieval, there must be a human in the loop. And the human in the loop is called the feedback part of it. So engineers work on they take a gold standard and they try to replicate it. And then when they think they've got it right, then it goes off to human raters, and that's the human in the loop. Yeah. And sometimes they have what they call human in the loop in the wild. And that's the test that Google does and all the experiments on samples of real searchers. So the quality raters guide and the whole, like, the humans are really important part of it. Yeah. So relevance comes from the final check is, what do the humans think? Let's take all the feedback, adjust everything accordingly, not at a single site level. We'll just take the whole measure and adjust the whole collection accordingly to get nearer to what they call the gold standard. And then when it's at near enough what they call minimal loss level that's acceptable, that's when it would get pushed out. Yeah. So you're 100% right in that the human quality raters are given guidance on, is this an appropriate result, and is it written with enough expertise and authority? I don't think it's I don't think there is such a thing as a neat algorithm. I think it's just a part of the feedback loop.
I think it's a component. Yeah. It's a way to talk about the things that could be assessed in determining authenticity.
Exactly. It's like,
it's not like a score.
No, exactly. Yeah. So, well, in effect, it's not a score, but it is the measurement is the humans that look at that expertise, authority, and trustment. And there is a score that comes back. And the score is normalized discounted cumulative gain, which everything gets adjusted by from all the hundreds of thousands or however many human quality raters are there. There's an adjustment based on expertise, authority, and trustworthiness. Is it spam? So forth. Distance from, here's our offering, this is what good looks like, what's an acceptable loss, if you like, and maybe then after the core algorithm is updated and rolled out, they maybe make some slight adjustments again, and that might be to reduce that loss based on the fact that these are now the final stage is now real people, so it's a bigger sample. So maybe the bigger sample has come back with some slight adjustments to minimize that loss, if you like, a little bit. So there is a score involved, but it's not perhaps what we think.
I was just reading before we got talking on Twitter today. They were talking about a patent about, I think it's from like 2007 or something, but about scoring author credibility and just all the different ways that Google can determine authenticity. And, it blows my mind how far we've come from just links and PageRank and trying to really understand the web.
Machine learning has been the massive magic formula because the computational power of them, that's it. Machine learning, semi and unsupervised machine learning has been the massive battery. I mean, obviously there is this challenge because it's still very expensive in computationally, environmentally, and obviously we have the whole world which is on high alert with the environment at the moment. So it's that's an area that needs to be like addressed, the computational expense of it. The biggest bill search engines is the electricity bill, which is not good for the environment. And I know Google have even talked about, for instance, with crawling, it's very expensive, not good for the environment, and so forth, and Index Now and Bing and so forth. So, but machine learning, I mean, not everything will use machine learning as well. Yeah. Some things will just be, I think there'll still be that. It's easy to take a hammer to a nut, as they say. Sometimes some things will use legacy systems. There's a lot of stuff being looked at, I know, in the IR space around these various stages of ranking, and that's something that they're trying to maybe use machine learning more and more on, because there's a lot of papers that talk about how a lot of them are still using these really old systems where you have like this initial, like really poor binary system that like checks if a word is in a document and it only fetches it back into the first fetch if the word is there type thing. And that is a legacy thing that's decades old now. And they're trying to improve that. But so the machine learning is the really, really big part of all of this hockey stick changes. Yeah.
Right.
But it's not perfect. Yeah. It's not perfect by a long chalk, really.
I've seen a lot of complaints about Google search lately. Actually, I'm talking to a reporter this week about a story on, how a lot of people think Google search has gotten worse. And I think that we're sort of like in an intermediate stage here where machine learning and AI advancements will make search better. I think in some areas it has. It's made it more trustworthy. But in some areas it's not as good right now because we're still learning.
No. I think there's still like disambiguation and dilution is still a real challenge, But bear in mind what we just talked about, whereby all of these people, we're all looking at search and looking at it from our perspective, So we're not maybe taking into consideration what that intent, this potential dynamic changing intent, we're if say, for instance, our religion is, Christian or Muslim or whatever, and everything changes in favor of something big that's happening in another religion, it's very easy for us to be a bit siloed in how we're seeing things when maybe things are changing a lot based on a bigger majority or many other different ambiguous or underspecified, more specified queries, if you like.
I find sometimes too, I'll think that search is maybe not working because I'll search for something and then I control F on the page and the word that I search for is not there. But sometimes when I look though, like my answer is actually there.
And it's in the collection. It's in the collection of that site. So that site could be an authority.
Yeah.
And it could have a great section on it and, and so forth. So you could be able to navigate to it. It might be well linked on it and so forth. But I think we're looking at things a little bit, and we as SEOs, I think we also tend to not look on the super long tail when we query things. We're looking on the head all the time. Hey, let's have a look at cars. Oh, have you seen the results? They're terrible. Yeah, but it's descending order of intent, and it's dynamic.
And how many people actually search for cars, right? Like, the word itself, cars.
They probably do, but it's such an underspecified query. What does it mean? It could mean so many things. It's the intent is huge on the head. Like dresses. Do I mean size whatever? Do I mean black? Do I mean cocktail dresses? Do I mean long dresses? Do I mean evening dresses? Do I mean people are not mapping things to the intent journey. We're all there like, hey, look at this head term, the results for that. Well,
and I think understanding, focusing on what the user is intending to do and what they're trying to accomplish, and then making it really easy for them to find that on your site and to trust the information is really the key right now.
I think people. Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say.
No, go ahead.
I think people go too long tail with it though now. And then it's very hard when something is so far from the core of something, it becomes fuzzy. And also when you have like many things that are quite similar, you almost end up with this fuzzy search thing where, well, that could be a candidate, but that could be a candidate, that could be a candidate. So you end up with fighting with yourself, So I think people should really avoid going too long tail because
makes sense. Yeah. Why don't we finish up by, and I don't know if we can, if we have time to talk about this because I had a lot of questions. It was mum upcoming, and I know Google has said that they're using mum. The current use in search is for vaccine information. That mum was able to allow Google to take all this really like rapidly changing information about vaccines and be very, they trust that they're able to put that information together in a good way.
It's like a multimodal curation of many things.
Yeah. Tell me, what do they mean by multimodal? Explain that first.
So you remember that example that they've got where somebody says, I've been hiking in the Pennines. The Pennines is near me. Well, you can hike there, but it's not very high. Anyway, the Pyrenees, yeah. So I've been hiking in the Pyrenees, and now I want to hike in the Alps. What do I need, type thing. So it's effectively, I know that a few of the blog posts talk about the fact that with a lot of machine learning, a lot of it is starting from scratch every time, and you have to build something and start all over again, which is a complete waste. When you consider as well all these other factors of, financial, computational, environmental, a lot of repurposing is possibly now available. So I think from what I can gather, Mom is eventually going to utilize a lot of the learnings that have been gained in this past few years with BERT and all the different hybrids and super BERTs that everybody's created, and then start to also apply it across languages, across images, across video, across all these different verticals of things, because obviously image search, video search, completely separate field of information retrieval, because you don't mine images, right. You don't mine videos, you categorize with entities and so forth, yeah? And lots more machine learning in images with pixels and stuff like that. So I think this multimodal thing means bringing all of these things, many things, together, a curation of all of the things, yeah? So not just 10 blue links, all of just everything. So like if somebody wants to go hiking in the Pyrenees, they probably want to look at videos, they probably want to look at images. I don't think it's a coincidence that the examples provided showed images, videos, text, questions, blog posts. And I think the whole discover things and the whole discover and the whole questions and answers, which is feeding the understanding and all the data that's being contributed, like there's Google Natural Questions that's being contributed now to natural language researchers. There's ORCAs, which is the click data set. There's passage indexing, which had a massive amount of data contributed by Bing to natural language researchers as well. And there's loads of others. So it's like all of these things eventually, Mum seems to be like a massive masterpiece of all of this repurposed across many, many facets of information provision, if you like, meeting information needs across many different media and conversation. It's everything, everywhere, and omnipresent. Every type of extension upon that need, if you like. And it's not going to happen straight away. Obviously there could be a lot of vectors that are connected. There's going to be a lot of computational necessity with it. It's a big thing, I would say. I think the Mum thing is probably just a very, very simple example that they've used, but very necessary at the time because of the disinformation that potentially was going around, Really needed, a worldwide crisis, pandemic status. And actually, I think it all looks back to, do you remember a few years ago they talked about search for the next 20 years? That where they talked about the 3 massive changes that were coming over the search for the long term. Yeah, so it's a bigger plan. It's like the user is the query. So it's all around more and more. And they've already said that Mum could potentially be a built-in platform that's designed around humans. Discover is really hard to emulate because it's focused on what the user's interests are. There's a temporal nature. It's hit and miss, etc. How can you can really only provide stuff around hobbies and interests and so forth. So it's really hard for tools to emulate it. So what did he say? A move towards images and a different form of media that's beyond text. And that fits in with search engines doing a lot more around images and asking us to add captions. They're ramping up a lot of the field of machine learning uses a lot of image recognition now in its research, pixels and so forth, and image recognition. And a lot of that classification, is this an orange? Is it an apple type thing? Right. Is this a Pomeranian or a pancake? That was So, and the more data they have, the more the confidence grows over time. So that's why there's so much data. There's Kaggle, for instance, which is data banks, and all these researchers all working together. So
it sounds like
times.
So it sounds like Mum is just going to help Google to pull a lot of this together in understanding the web better, because they've gotten so much better in understanding text in the last few years, and when you combine that with, I know one of the examples they gave in the Search On presentation was, the lens. Google Lens has me very excited. And I don't hear a lot of people talking about it. I mean, it's more than just, let me point my phone at something and you can tell me what it is. I think it's really going to evolve into
it's going to be massive. Image recognition is going to be massive, because think about it. Sorry, I keep interrupting you.
No, go ahead. I want to hear what you have to say.
The next generation, we are SEOs. I know there's a lot of great young people coming through, and that's wonderful. But a lot of SEOs some of us are a bit older, and I think we tend to be a little bit stuck in our thinking, and we're not thinking about the next generations coming through. And the next generations are different. They're image-led, they're video-led, they're consuming TV in different ways, they're consuming sport, they're doing everything differently. So search is now focused on the generations that are about to come into spenders. They're the next consideration. So everything needs to be around very image based. For instance, that's why everything is run, and the technology is following the demand. That's it. The technology is following where is the focus. And it's this huge bank of images that is everywhere. So
so much that could be learned.
We have to be thinking about the next generations that are coming through. What matters to them, because they're coming into. Ultimately, search engines are commercial, and everything commercial is driven by demand, and that's what's coming through. The next generation of spenders. That's it. Because the Zipf distribution. A lot of people going out, people coming in, people becoming the emerging spenders. So think the world, if we think of everything as sites with this whole what is important, and remember that importance takes this curve, the populations of cities takes that curve. If you're focusing on trying to build things for every town in the world, you're going to come a cropper, because it doesn't matter. Focus on the hubs of importance. Those hubs that we talk about, the big topic hubs, they're what they call strongly connected components. And the world is full of strongly connected components which follow a Zipf distribution. There's a few websites that have the most links in the world, but then it just drops off a cliff over time. So we have to always remember this Zipf power law in everything that we do in SEO and everything. Don't kill ourselves trying to rank for 10 query pages. It's not worth it. Go for big stuff. Go for the bigger, and then go for the prize, the big prize.
That makes sense. That's kind of how my career came to be. Was I focused on Google penalties and that was my subject matter. I was the expert in that. And I think that gave me some level of authority to be able to then go talk about other subjects in terms of SEO. So I think, one of the main take-home points for people listening would be to focus on your area of expertise and build that out.
Overflow SEO. Do something, do it well, overflow it. Keep breaking it down into categories as you've got enough of a topic to be strong, to be a strongly connected component. And dampen everything else. Because your walnuts, do you remember I said at the very beginning, walnuts and peanuts? Walnuts always rise to the top in a bowl of nuts on a bar. Not that anybody's putting their hand in bowl. Not that anybody's doing that anymore, where you put your hand in a bowl of nuts. On a bar. No, nobody does that anymore. But it's an analogy that's used a lot. You see it in all these motivational talks about talent and about everything in the world. The walnuts and peanuts walnuts rise to the top. Make your topic a walnut. And that is how I think you become an expert. Yeah. And then you'll get natural links because actually you're an expert. And you'll get genuine links because you write on a topic with authority and you're an expert on it because you've read that much on it, you know.
Exactly. And I think as Google gets better at understanding language, I really believe that they understand more and more which links are truly recommendations and recommendations from people that matter as opposed to manufactured. So
the walnut will rise to the top in the link graphs on the web and the entity graphs on the web. The strongly connected components will be visible the more data they have. They will lift up. That's how it looks in a graph. If they mapped it with data, you would have these clusters, strong clusters, that are literally strong, lots of dots around there, like the others are crowding around that core point, and that's
what we want to be then, right? We want to be exactly. I want to be a lot of dots.
If all of a sudden you have this tiny random dot with nothing, and then a million links point it, and nothing else is none of the other walnuts have referenced it. That's not a natural link, is it? On a
That's
topic?
Right. That's right. No, it would be very easy to see those patterns.
It's going to scream at you, if you're a data scientist. So so
that's this has been good. What a great. We should do this more often.
I hope it's been useful.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. I know I don't want to keep you because I think you're going out for a run now, right? Is that
well, actually I'm not now because there's a huge storm here. We don't get that many. And just before I came on this call, like 3 minutes before, my son rang me to tell me that his shed had blown out of his garden and we're into a car actually, and all the neighbours had to go out and pull his shed back into his garden. So I've spoken to my group of runners and we've said we're not running. That said, I am going to move my dinner forward instead.
There you go. There you go. Yeah. You don't want to go out and get blown away by the wind. That would not be a good way to end the day. Well, Dawn, if people want to reach out to you, how can they do that if they want to connect with you?
I'm on Twitter at Doniando, and I'm via my website, Berty, BERTEY.com, Berty.com. That's probably the best places, to be honest. Via Twitter, Doniando, or via Berty.com.
I would recommend following Dawn on Twitter. I know you don't tweet as much as you have in the past, but when you tweet stuff, it's always very, very interesting and thought-provoking. So so thank you for that. For if anybody wants to reach me and my team, you can reach us at help@mariehaynes.com. And thanks so much for listening to this episode, and I wish you the best of luck with your rankings.